Okay. So it's good afternoon. It's very strange to be in Greece and speak in English. I've lived I've been working for more than 30 years abroad, but I'm one of those Greeks who love Greek and the Greek language, and you will never hear me come to Greece and say «Πώς το λέτε αυτό εδώ στην Ελλάδα». But in any case, I'm delighted for this invitation and the opportunity to talk about tobacco control in the 21st century. I want to start to tell you a story. I have no slides. I have no complex tables to show you, but I want to take you through some very, very important milestones that have shaped today's approaches to sustainable development, to health development, and of course, in addressing the global epidemic of tobacco. Well, I was reminded by Lina at the lunch break. I was telling her a story. One of my portfolio in the WHO at one stage was also to be responsible for tobacco. I was heading tobacco and non-communicable diseases. And we were going through a number of interviews throughout the years to appoint new staff. One of the key questions to new staff, mainly outsiders, was this. Could you please tell me what would you do if you were offered $1 million by the tobacco industry to fund your campaign and your studies against tobacco? That was the question. And of course, the answer was absolutely not. I would never accept money from the tobacco industry. If they made the mistake to say yes, they didn't have the job. Now, I also would like to share with you that in my very early years, as I was starting, having just finished the medical school, I had the privilege in 1980 to work for a year as one of his junior advisors with Minister Doxiadis. There are many young people in this room, you may not know him, but he was one of the most inspiring ministers of health in the early 80s, who was totally committed to making Greece smoke-free. He introduced the campaign, Tobacco or Health, this is a choice. And the reason I mention this to you is because he remains the most inspiring leader ever that I have come across in my own country, having worked with almost every leader in the Ministry of Health, who had such a strong vision and courage to address the issues of tobacco control. There is also something else that it is very, very particular about tobacco. We had the first evidence that tobacco is harmful to health in the very early 50s. And it took us half a century to generate the will, the courage, the evidence, and the global community to develop the famous Framework Convention for Tobacco Control, which was launched 15 years ago. It took us half a century to do that. Fierce debates with the tobacco industry, with a wide range of stakeholders who resisted the change. And what was the key word in all this business? The key word was addiction. For many, many decades, everybody resisted the idea that tobacco is an addiction. And dear friends, let's face it, what we are talking about in our society today, when we talk on the one hand about the non-communicable diseases epidemic, this is the big problem in the world. And on the other hand, about behaviors, we have to think about two aspects now. One is, tobacco is not the only addiction. We are addicted to sugar. We are addicted to salt. We are addicted to all sorts of pleasant additives the food industry puts in the various things we eat. Crisps, chips, all sorts of things. Sugar is present not in sweets only, because if I want to eat a sweet, an ice cream, that's my choice. But if you go to the supermarket and you look on the shelves behind on the ingredients of foods, you will discover that sugar is everywhere present, from tomato sauce to ham, to cheeses, to anything you can imagine. Addiction. We are addicted. How can we get rid of these addictions? The industry is powerful. The industry invests millions and billions. We, the public health advocates, we are really, we have the evidence, but we don't have the means. Even in debates, we will be talking about this tomorrow, the ethics of tobacco control, big business. When the industry employs with millions the best lawyers in the United States to talk about the First or the Second Amendment, the freedom of speech and God knows what, to talk about the various ethical dimensions of tobacco control, of course, we are very weak very often, ill-prepared to engage in a debate with the big forces. So it is an uneven game. There is now in the world, it's called the Foundation for a World of Healthy, Free Children, Healthy World, by Philip Morris. Don't touch this money. There are countries in the world who have issued legislation and they say nowhere near, whether you work in education, in public health, or I don't know what. Poland is one of those countries. But there are other countries like Austria who is totally against all this business. And it's a complete laissez-faire in all this. Now, let me bring you to the 21st century. What are the givens that we have? The FCTC is the strongest public health instrument which is compulsory at a global stage, at the global level. There is also a protocol which is on illicit tobacco, which to be ratified and have the same kind of legitimacy as the convention, it needs another 5 countries. I hope this is going to happen very soon. This is the protocol for illicit tobacco trade. These 2 instruments are very powerful and are very important. Why? Because countries can build and shape their legislation on those legal instruments. The WHO has a toolkit, which you may know, which is called Empower. The Empower kit basically addresses 5 important aspects of tobacco control: monitoring, quitting, becoming aware and being protected from various advertisements, tax, and there is one more which I don't remember: advertising, tax, protection, monitoring, and warning. It's a comprehensive package. Now, the good news today, 15 years on from the adoption of the Framework Convention for Tobacco Control, is that today there are a number of countries in the world which have taken really powerful steps. And they have created a momentum and a legitimacy. And also, they have created a fact that it is possible. We're talking about countries like Australia, for example, who very powerfully introduced measures to reduce tobacco consumption to very low levels in their societies. They introduced not only pictograms and all that, but also plain packaging in cigarettes, which has been so debatable. The tobacco industry fiercely has fought this idea of 2 types of messages. What is the difference between text and evidence and pictograms? Because they were claiming pictograms create emotions, and emotions should not be, and that the state should be somehow neutral, not to create. I give you the information and you decide. But if I also give you information, visual information, that creates an emotional reaction in you, the industry fought against this, saying this is not legit. In one case, they won in the United States. In one case, they lost. Then there is another issue that it is important for us. We know much more about the determinants of health. This is key because until very recently, we all had this idea that we can craft a good anti-smoking message, spread it out, and then we expect our clients, our target groups, to embrace those messages, to endorse them, to quit smoking. Well, the truth is that the reasons why we smoke, and there are gradients by social class, beautiful literature on the inequalities of health and smoking that you should be aware. There is a social gradient. The circumstances within which people adopt certain behaviors is very important. I have met in my career in WHO ministers of health who came to me and they said, I'm going to introduce legislation and I'm going to tell all citizens, I'm going to what is harmful about smoking, I'm going to have the best quitting services to support them, but if they do not comply, it is not the state which is going to pay for their costly diseases, chronic diseases. This is fascism. I said to those ministers, forgive me, but these are the thinking, this is the thinking in the 70s. when we thought that health education and blaming the victim was the thing to do. Today, you have to empower people. You have to create circumstances that will help them adopt healthy lifestyles. One of the most promising concepts today in public health is health literacy, which is not just about messages. It's about giving a person the skills, not just the knowledge, the skills, the understanding, the tools to navigate the complex environment within which they live. And then they can make the healthy choices, the easy choices, as we say in health promotion. Also, the determinants of health literature, which is very rich today, tells us why and how we can influence the social and environmental circumstances within which people live. But let me take you to the most important aspect. Today, in the 21st century, the key word is that health is a political choice. Health is a political choice. Why? Because health is determined by a wide array of policies of every other sector. The health sector has a small part of this pie. And it is a political choice because politicians have to make tough decisions if they are to take seriously the health of their citizens. You know what is great in the 21st century? We didn't have it before. It's more recent. The Sustainable Development Goals, the SDG agenda. If you don't know about this, please look it up. The 17 goals of the United Nations that were adopted by all countries 3 years ago. There are 17. One of them is about health. Within that, tobacco is a big issue, but it is an issue which says that tobacco today is a threat to global development. And you need to mobilize at the highest level of government, politicians, professionals, activists, to fight this epidemic, and the epidemic and those who control and influence the risk factors, the factors that define our behaviors. So the SDG agenda is absolutely crucial. But to go back to a political choice, again, I was talking to my friends before, and I have seen it with my own eyes. I was the representative of WHO to present the tobacco strategy in the presence of Prime Minister then Erdogan in Turkey. And I witnessed the passion of that guy speaking about tobacco control in a country where smoking is part of its DNA, of its culture, where agriculture was a big part. But this was the great moment. He got up to the stand and he said, "Finished. This business costs our country billions. I know there is an industry, I know this and this. Cut." And I don't know how many of you have traveled to Turkey. You will be very surprised. You go to restaurants, you go to bars, you go whenever you like. No smoking. In Europe, when people changed, it didn't come from the more disciplined countries. Very interesting. I was living in Copenhagen. The Danes were not so disciplined. I thought they would be the first, like the Swedes. It was the Irish. It was Ireland. The culture of pubs and smoking and having fun. The first ones. Then it was Italy. Then it was France. And then one country after the other. So, it is in a way unpredictable how, with the correct leadership in a country, a correct vision, you can move mountains. I have been in endless debates about the ethics, I was in France when the restaurateurs had a first reaction against this is going to close our business and this is going... Nothing like that happened. France is smoke-free. Finished. Now, I'm not going to comment why in Greece, with one of the best legislations against tobacco, we are the worst in terms of implementation and addiction and so on. How many minutes have I got, Mr.? 4. 4 minutes. So I would like to say this. We are all so much engaged in debates about the ethics or the difficulties of tobacco control. Endless discussions now about the electronic cigarette. The WHO verdict will remain negative. It is an addiction. You may have some uses in terms of quitting and so on. But I tell you what, I worked for public health for 30 years. I will tell you that the most sacred goals of 21st century public health, if we want to think seriously about sustainable development, is 2 things. One is, let's create healthy new generations. You can do whatever you like with your lives, but don't spoil the lives of the children. So, you want to have 15 electronic cigarettes coming out of your mouth, do it. You want to find scientific evidence that may support a little bit your arguments, do it. But your children, it will be a crime to get them on any of those addictions. Because today, we have the knowledge and we have the will if we want, as practice has proven around the world. The second big goal of modern public health is to think about inequalities. Inequalities in health. Inequalities in opportunities to access healthy lifestyles and healthy environments. That's the idea in our century of creating a world which can be sustainable, which will be strong enough to counteract the fierce efforts of the tobacco industry, which will continue in the future. But I think today we do have the knowledge, we do have the good inspiring examples, and we do have the global instruments to make that difference. Thank you.